Welcome. Hello, everybody. Wherever you're joining us from, thank you so much for tuning in to Redis Conf 2020 and our exclusive interview with Nicole Hubbard. Real quick, my name is Katya, and I help support a lot of the large enterprise customers here at Redis Labs, and I've worked with some of the largest global banks, healthcare companies, and media and streaming companies as well. And so I'm very honored here to lead a Q&A for you guys with Nicole, who is the developer advocate at Hashicorp. So with that, how this session is going to look is we're going to start with introductions, of course, but ultimately this session is for you. We want to hear from you. So whatever questions you have on Redis and Hashicorp, please use the chat window on the bottom left, and we will take questions as they come in. So with that, Nicole, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and what brings you to RedisConf?
Sure. So I'm Nicole Hubbard. I am a developer advocate at Hashicorp. We focus on building infrastructure tooling to help you automate your infrastructure. And so one of the things that I get to focus on and work with is Console, which provides a service mesh as well as some additional features. And so those can be used. And so that's why I'm here today, is to talk about how you can leverage service mesh to help secure your communication between services, including into a Redis database.
Awesome. Thank you. So with that, why don't we begin with, why don't you tell us a little bit more of what Hashicorp does?
Yeah. And so we started off as a company building Vape as our first tool. So a lot of developers use that locally to help with their local dev environments. And from there, we kind of grew the company. Some people don't always realize who Hashicorp is. And so to help y'all, we build Terraform, which is a tool to help you manage your infrastructure as code. So you can define what your infrastructure looks like in code and deploy that out to all of the cloud providers, as well as other providers. And then we also have tools like Vault to help you secure your secrets, and things like Console to secure your network. And then we provide some tooling to help interact with Kubernetes, as well as our own orchestration platform, Nomad.
Nice. Yeah, I saw the session that you did for us earlier this morning, and I want to say thank you for even doing a demo of all that. Really appreciate that. For those in the audience that haven't seen the session yet, just go to the sessions and search for Nicole's name, and then you can access it through there. A lot of good content. Of course, a demo as well. But here is for those of folks that either haven't heard of what ServiceMesh is or haven't really looked at the session yet. This is a good opportunity to learn how you can utilize it. And so with that, we have a couple of folks in the chat window that are interested to know, what is ServiceMesh?
So this is one of the number one questions I get asked. What is a service mesh? And so my first answer is go check out my talk. I go into it in a lot of depth.
Yes.
But at a high level, a service mesh is a lot of things, but specifically it will help you secure communications with mutual TLS between all of your services. It allows you to define rules as to which services are allowed to communicate with one another. And then depending on which service mesh you choose, there's additional functionality that some provide that others don't have. So it depends on which route you go. And so there's things that can help you with securing communications from your applications into cloud provider databases. So if you're using a managed Redis from one of the cloud providers, you can secure that too. And so it lets you do all of these things without having to make application changes, because it runs next to your application and allows you to just proxy your communication through its sidecar. And that provides all of the authentication, all of that authorization for you, while you get to continue just building your applications the way you do today.
Okay. So before Service Mesh, how were people doing that before?
A lot of different ways. So used to adding authentication between your services meant for every service you had to go into the code base and add the code if you were lucky, all of your code bases were the same language. So you could build a single shared module that you could just import into your code bases. If you're in the real world, you probably had 2 or 3 or maybe even 5 or more different programming languages all of your applications are in. So you had to reinvent that piece over and over for each application to do the security, to do rate limiting, to do traffic routing. And some of those are easier than others to solve.
Wow. Yeah, that's certainly something I've seen with the large enterprise customers as well, is that they don't just have one language that they work in, and not just one cloud or one platform. So that's certainly, I see where you and a service mesh do come into play. So
yeah.
So what are the typical challenges when someone does start using ServiceMesh? What do they run into that maybe you could help them be a little bit more proactive in their approach as they start this journey?
Yeah, so as you get started, a lot of the challenges initially is just how do you get started? Because deploying it is fairly simple, but how do you make it ready for production? And so that's something, at least with Console, we're working to make very simple. If you're deploying it into Kubernetes, we have a Helm chart to help you get started. And it's very easy, just changing some values to secure your entire configuration so that you've got ACLs turned on, you've got TLS turned on, and all of that encryption turned on. With other providers, there's different ways you do that. But then also, once you get it, the next step is actually starting to add your applications to it. And so the nice thing is service meshes make that pretty simple. You can add the sidecar proxy to your applications in most cases and not make any changes, and your services can continue to communicate with one another the same way they do today. And then as you go, you can actually turn them on one by one to have each application start communicating with other applications through the service mesh instead. And so that is my number one recommendation. Don't try to turn everything on at once. Go one set of applications and that it's talking to at a time.
Okay. Well, Pawan, I really hope that answers your question about what a service mesh is and how to use it, and what to look out for, of course. So the general trend that I've seen is probably, service mesh really transitions well into or has a big part in is microservices. Is that something that is like a primary use case that you guys see in terms of deployment?
Yeah, so when you don't have microservices, you just have one huge monolith. And then when you have that, you don't have these problems of how do my services communicate with one another? How do I secure that? Your environment's a lot more simple. The problem is that's harder to scale. And so as you start to move into microservices, you want to deploy ways to abstract out core components like your networking and things along those lines.
Okay. So what tech trends are you excited about? Look at how your face lit up. I love it. Okay. I'm excited to hear what's next.
So for me, one of the biggest ones is containers. I've worked with containers. I've worked with Docker for years. I've been a part of the Kubernetes community for a long time now. And so these are the things that are really exciting to me, and that trend to continue moving that direction. I don't know that Kubernetes is the end all be all, but the goals that it's starting to set and the things that are being built upon that are pretty awesome and what I'm excited about the most.
That's cool. I like. In your session, in the demo portion, if I recall correctly, there were elements of using Redis to help streamline the processes and everything. And mind you, I'm not as technical as you, so I'm probably shooting myself in the foot, which is okay. But for those of us out there that use Redis and understand, or for those folks in the audience that are a little bit more tech savvy like yourself, can you go into some detail around how you use Redis in your day-to-day?
Yeah, so as a developer advocate, I don't get to do a lot of hands-on technical work as much these days. Most of my time spent talking with customers. But in past lives, I've been software engineer focused on SRE type of work. And so in those cases, I have been able to use Redis. And so I've been able to use it for caching and, more importantly, creating geographic data stores that we needed to replicate out to numerous regions so that we could actually keep our data in sync across numerous regions. And so I've done that with pushing out configs so that we are able to keep those in sync. And one of the more interesting problems that I solved was building a global logging solution for one of the cloud providers I worked at, where we were able to actually ingest billions of logs per day, all flowing through Redis.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing. I hope the performance and the latency was exactly what we tend to communicate to others and what other Redis users experience.
Yeah, it was great. It performed well.
Good. That always makes me happy to hear, because I'm very biased.
Yeah.
So as a developer advocate, maybe some folks have their eyes set on, that's their next step in their career, or maybe they're currently, developer advocates, but maybe they want to improve or what have you. What advice can you give to folks that are in your position or want to be in your position?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things is interact with the community. Get out there, talk with people who are using the tools that you're interested in, give talks, speak at events, even if it's just a meetup. It doesn't matter where you're speaking. Just get out there, start talking with people, get in front of them, talk to them, show them how to do things. Find what you're passionate about, and then keep working with that.
That's awesome. That's so fantastic. Oh man, in times like these, we have to find new ways to network, and with this platform here with RedisConf, you can do that. And so I don't know if you're going to be sticking around after the interview, but for those folks in the audience, if you do have questions, you can engage with one another as well. By clicking on each other's avatars and starting a session. And so, Nicole, if you're open to that, maybe that's something that people can do as well.
Yeah, I'll definitely be online after this is over.
Awesome. I'm very excited. That'll be good. And same goes with me, because that's something that RedisConf gives people the ability to do, is collaborate and improve and keep growing. And so we're, want to make sure that we communicate that we want that to happen as well. And so to kind of go into a couple of other things, what do you think, what are some takeaways that you want people to leave with after this Q&A session 1, and 2, after the session that you actually did for us? What are the key takeaways that you want the audience to have in mind?
Yeah, I think the big one for me is service meshes aren't entirely magical, and they're not hard. Getting started with them is fairly simple. Being able to use them is fairly simple. And you can use them with pretty much any applications that you have that are communicating with one another. So in my talk, in the demo, I actually added Redis to our service mesh. I made no code changes to Redis. I just added the proxy next to it and ensured that Redis was only listening on localhost, so that only that proxy could communicate with it, so that all communications had to go through our service mesh, which then allowed me to limit which applications could actually talk to the database. So in addition to your standard security, you can add additional security layers on top of that, similar to what you would do with networking, firewall rules, and things along those lines, which in the microservice world and dynamic infrastructure with Kubernetes and things like that, it's a lot harder to create your generic firewall rules that say only this application running on this server can communicate with this server, because you don't have those single one-to-one mappings anymore.
I see. So in that light, it's always great to hear examples and think about the worst case scenarios and the best case scenarios, but sometimes the worst case scenarios are the ones that have taught us the most. And so what can you give us an example of a situation where, things didn't work out the way that you wanted it to, but you found a different solution. And what was it? And how did you get there?
Yeah. So let me see.
And take your time. I know that's a little very high level, broad. So don't worry. Take your time. But it'd be really awesome to hear about a real life example.
Yeah. So with ServiceMesh, I was deploying a ServiceMesh into Kubernetes. I had never used it before, any ServiceMesh actually. So I had no idea what I was doing. And of course, I'm trying to set this up for production. What could go wrong? And so we started enabling it, and turns out I did not follow the advice I gave to everyone earlier.
Oh.
We were turning it on everywhere. So we're like, okay, we're going to add ServiceMesh. So what we need to do is add the ServiceMesh components to all of our applications and redeploy them so that they all start using the ServiceMesh, and then route everything through it. And so when we did that, we discovered that, well, we didn't discover right away, but there was a configuration error. And so because of that, all of our communication quit working between all of our services. And so we had about a 30-minute downtime where we spent about the first 10 minutes trying to figure out how to fix it, what it was. We couldn't figure it out because all of this was still new to us. And all of a sudden we had all of these errors from all of our applications, and trying to figure out what was what. We didn't understand it. And so we ended up rolling it back, getting everything back online. And so about 30 minutes of downtime. And then after that, we were able to test again with our staging environment. We were able to find out we actually just set a configuration variable wrong. So it wasn't being passed in at all. And so it was using the default. And so everything was failing. And so we were able to do it. But when we deployed it again, we did not do the Big Bang approach. We actually deployed one application first to make sure it came up, and then a second application, and got those talking to one another, and then started deploying the other apps.
Okay. Was that resolved?
Yes. And so with that, it was able to actually resolve our issue, but we did end up having a production downtime issue.
Well, it would be very rare for someone to say they've never had or never experienced anything like that. So,
I mean, I've only accidentally deleted production entirely once in my career.
Oh, okay. They got us once, right? Silver linings. Yeah, but those things, they definitely do help us learn. So I appreciate you sharing that. It's nice to know that we're not alone in our pursuit in perfection, so to say.
Yes.
Awesome. So we have a couple of questions here from the audience. Let's see. Marcelino has a question around, and it is, would you have any recommendation about Redis time series being used as a container with host volumes or CSI volumes like Kubernetes and Nomad over using Redis time series directly installed in bare metal?
Ooh,
good question.
It is a great question. My initial answer is I like sticking data stores on either bare metal or VMs rather than inside of Kubernetes. It can be done. I will say in the newer versions of Kubernetes, this works way better than it used to work. If you have proper replication so that you can actually handle a single instance of this going offline, running it inside of Kubernetes with the correct pod disruption budget set would probably work. It should work quite well, actually. However, Kubernetes can sometimes get stuck if it's rescheduling your pod and it has to unmount that block storage from your provider, no matter which provider it is. Sometimes those get stuck when they're being transitioned to a new host. And so that can cause failures where you actually have to go in and unmount it manually and allow Kubernetes to remount it at that point. And so that can cause production downtime if you're not careful and you don't have proper monitoring in place. So the big thing would be if you do run it in Kubernetes, make sure you have a lot of monitoring, make sure you have pod disruption budgets, and that you have replication. Otherwise, keep it out of Kubernetes.
I see. Could you elaborate what proper monitoring means?
Yeah, so in this case, proper monitoring would specifically be around the number of pods that you're running for. So say you deploy this with 3 instances in your Kubernetes cluster, you would want monitoring that would notify you if there were only 2 instances running for longer than a couple minutes. That way, if one of those gets hung while it's trying to be rescheduled to another node, you actually know and have either auto reconciliation that will go in and unschedule or unmount that volume for you from the cloud provider, or you can have someone from your operations team go in and do that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that question, Marcelino. Awesome. Roman P is asking, what's the easiest way to try out ServiceMesh and see what it looks like? It's a good question, yeah?
Yeah, great question. You can get started with, so if you've got Docker installed on your local developer workstation, you can actually enable Kubernetes inside of Docker with a single checkbox, and that will get you a running Kubernetes cluster all locally. And from there, with console, you can deploy just a single Helm chart and get a working console cluster. You'll need to make a couple tweaks so that you are only trying to start 1 instance of your server instead of 3 across 3 nodes, because you're running it on a laptop, so you only have 1. Mm-hmm. Besides that, from there, you can then start deploying applications. And in the case of console, we actually have a bunch of learn guides at learn.hashicorp.com that can actually walk you through running this locally on your machine or on a cloud-provided cluster.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for that question, Roman. Harish has a question as well. He is asking, is it possible to create a Redis cluster within Kubernetes using iOS Search Mesh?
Yes. It's easy. You would follow the same steps you would take with deploying Redis into Kubernetes for the most part. The big difference would be the way you communicate with the servers, communicate with one another. You would use the sidecar proxies to route all of the traffic between them to one another. And so you would have to configure each server to listen for or to communicate with the other servers, and then configure those servers to make sure their listen IPs match with what's there so that they all know how to communicate with one another.
Awesome. Thank you. Hope that answers your question. Yeah, I mean, I personally, the applications of ServiceMesh, they definitely make sense. And I certainly like how it fits in with microservices. That's something that I've seen on my side of the table to be really popular. It's one of our most downloaded white papers from Redis. How does Redis fit into your microservices architecture? So that's definitely a good read for those of you that are interested in learning a little bit more about that too. So yeah, let's see. Am I missing? Did I miss any? Let me see. And if you guys are having technical difficulties, please drop a note in the comment box so that way we can make sure that your question gets answered. Cool. Okay, awesome. All right, so that's it. Those are it for the questions for now. I'm sure a couple of you are typing as we speak. When going back to the trends that are taking place today and what you were really excited in, how does that shape the way you approach things at Hashicorp with ServiceMesh or other products too? I know you mentioned the Kubernetes was something that you're really passionate in. So how does that shape the technology you work with and what you recommend as well?
Yeah, so it's one of those where we've actually started to take as a company a approach of Kubernetes as a first-class citizen to all of our applications. So we've built a lot of tooling to help integrate all of our tools into Kubernetes. We have a recently released Terraform operator that can run inside of Kubernetes to help you with Terraform from inside of Kubernetes. We've got the Helm chart to deploy console. We've got the Vault agents that can run, as well as Helm charts to deploy Vault inside of Kubernetes. And so for me, it's really awesome because I can help with anyone getting these running inside of Kubernetes. And for dev environments, I'm testing prototype environments. It's very simple to just stand them up in a Kubernetes cluster. There's no logging into servers, configuring things. It's just a single Helm deploy. And so it makes it a lot easier for me to help people get started and start playing with it to see if it's useful for them, rather than going through all the tedious work of trying to set up an application.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, thank you for that. With a couple of minutes remaining, are there any announcements or things that you want to share with the audience to make sure that you can rinse your hands, so to say, and call this a complete session and Q&A at RedisConf?
Sure. So one, if you want to connect with me, feel free to reach out on Twitter or my email. Both of those are in my talk session in the video. You can also find me on LinkedIn or all the other social media platforms, as well as check out the Learn guides that we publish on learn.hashicorp.com to get started with our tooling. And then there was something else I wanted to mention that now I've forgotten.
Well, while you remember, feel free to interject whenever you remember. But for those of you in the audience, you have access to Nicole's session both all day today and all day and night tomorrow. Yeah, so within her session, she talks a lot about what is ServiceMesh, why should you use it, some of the common challenges. We only discussed one, but there are a couple more, so there's 3 total. And it's a really great presentation. So if you have time today, I do recommend to check it out, and do connect with Nicole. She loves to help, and she's really passionate about what she does and where technology is going. So, well, thank you so much, Nicole. And I hope you enjoyed your RedisConf experience, and everybody in the Q&A and in the audience, thank you. We certainly enjoyed taking your questions as well. Ooh, yeah. One more, Marcelino. Okay, so before we get kicked off, Marcelino is asking about Nomad, Vault, and Console integration. Which one should handle the service ACLs, since Console has ones for the services, but also Vault can create tokens with policies to handle console services? Or am I wrong about this? Thank you for your question.
So I'll start with the honest truth. I've not actually tried to stand all 3 of these up together. Okay. But I do happen to know that Console has those integrations. There's integration pieces between Nomad and Console. And if I'm remembering correctly, we also have those same integration pieces between Nomad and Vault. So my initial thought would be you would want to look at Nomad to configure all of those, and Nomad would properly configure those in each of the separate services. So that's where I would start, is with the Nomad docs.
Thank you. Awesome. Yeah. I'm so happy we were able to finish off with that one too.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Enjoy the rest of RedisConf, and you guys don't forget, you can totally chat and network with one another here through RedisConf platform as well.
Awesome. Look forward to talking with y'all.
Enjoy. Thank you, Nicole. Take care.
Right. Bye.
Bye.